Living all my life in a small town in Romania, yes, that little country with Dracula and gypsies, I was lucky enough to live in a nice part of town with a tightly knit community, spending most of my childhood in the forest surrounding most of our part of town. We'd always hang out in the forest with friends, building makeshift shelters, pretending to be adults. Hell, watching too much Discovery Channel, we even started campfires to cook baked apples. We put them on a stick and over the campfire. I'm still amazed we haven't burned the forest down. All those survival shows from Discovery and Animal Planet really stuck with our young, sponge-like minds. We'd be out all day until dusk, climbing up rocks and trees, eating fruits from the forest, blackberries, wild strawberries, apples, pears, you name it. Of course, our parents scolded us for not having an appetite at dinner time, but we were enjoying our youth. This one particular incident happened when I was around 13 years old. Very close to my house, through a smaller street, you reach a place nicknamed the Devil's Bridge. Contrary to the spooky name I gave it when I was 6 years old, it used to be a huge dump site. Luckily, they cleaned it up, and by the time of this story, nature started reclaiming the barren earth. I met up with my two friends/neighbors, let's call them Chad and Louie. We decided to go to a place very near the Devil's Bridge, quickly making our way there, laughing all the way. We arrived at the bridge and got down on the structure's right side, near the small creek. Our target was a small waterfall a little ways up the creek, near which Chad saw a nice area for a makeshift cabin. Making our way up the slippery damp moss covered in rocks, I felt a bit lightheaded and nauseous, but snapped back. We walked a bit further and reached another area to climb, and up we went. I made it up, and something felt off. Scanning the area around, something caught my eye. Off of a tree branch, dangled by a string, a nylon bag. The way it was tied was very strange. A sphere-shaped head part, then the string, and the rest of the bag hanging down like a dress. It reminded me of a Japanese rain-warding doll. But then a disgusting stench hit my nostrils, making me gag. My friends made it up in the meanwhile. They whiffed it as well.
"What's that awful smell?"
Louis asked.
"Jesus Christ, that's disgusting,"
Chad said. I have no idea. Stay here, I'll go check, I said. I covered my nose with my t-shirt, steadily making my way towards the tied-up nylon bag. I started lowering myself so I could see underneath. I wish I hadn't, though. Slowly coming into sight was a small tail, then hind legs. By the fur and general physique, it was no doubt a puppy. Someone, some heartless bastard or wicked harpy, hung a puppy in a nylon bag. I felt disgusted and furious. I turned to my friends and told them what was underneath. Chad began crying on the spot. Louis was left with an expression of shock and horror on his face. We consoled Chad for a minute, and as soon as he regained his composure, I decided what to do. I took my knife out of my backpack, tying my t-shirt into a mask of sorts. My friends asked me what I was about to do, and I told them I was going to bury the small animal. They looked at each other with sudden enlightenment, and both of them approved. I thought of it as a good idea. I went over and cut the string, slowly letting the pup down. Then, with some thicker branch that I thinned the tip of, started taking apart the soft soil. Soon a deep enough hole was created. By the remainder of the string, I gently placed the pup in the hole and covered it back, placing a huge boulder over the loosened dirt to make sure some bear or wolf would have a hard time digging it up. We gathered around the stone, said a prayer, stayed in a daze about the whole event. We were silent for a few moments. I wanted to suggest to go back home, but before I could open my mouth, I heard a crack, very nearby. It startled us. We looked around, and saw nothing. We heard another crack, this time even closer than before. We bolted, pumping our legs like there was no tomorrow. The next morning, we decided to go back. Still shook by the recent event, we wanted to see if the pup was still buried. Sticks and knife in hand, we were brave little warriors going on a mission. We got back slowly, carefully scanning our surroundings. We arrived at the same spot. The boulder was a ways off the grave. The dirt mysteriously undisturbed. I found the makeshift tool made yesterday and started digging tenderly. It was empty. We were in awe. How could the body be missing, but the ground undisturbed? No footprints, no marks other than the rock being farther away. We decided to go farther up towards the waterfall. When we arrived, water was crashing down on the walks below. A calm, meditative sound. Branches, leaves, and moss all around the ground surrounding the waterfall. I saw something out of place again, not blending at all with the color palette of the forest's usual look. 3 puppies, eviscerated, in a small pool of blood. Everything went quiet. It was such a sad sight to behold. We looked up and saw a woman, the most vile creature I've ever seen in my life. Old, off, her hair stringy and gray. It went everywhere, in all directions. Under the massive clump of her hair, her eyes were darkened out, as she was gritting her teeth at us. Ugly, yellowish brown and green teeth that looked like someone threw them in her mouth, sitting at jagged angles, much too long, lips almost non-existent. She pushed air through her throat, making a deep, guttural, gurgling grunt. It was so unexpected, and it sounded disgusting. She fanned her arms out, and she was naked, only an old ripped-up cloak on her. I winced, gagged, and tears welled up in my eyes. It was a horrid sight. Scars all over in the strangest of places. Wrinkles and creases oddly shaped and morphed her body, her chest sagging, her legs bent inwards. I have never in my life ran as fast as I did that day. Chad, being so small and scared, nearly passed out. I still have no idea how a small 13-year-old like myself managed to pick him up in my arms and run with him, jumping with precision down the small ledges and rocks. Louis was fast as well, keeping up right behind me. We made it back to the Devil's Bridge. I slowly put Chad down on his feet, still shaking. We looked back towards the climbing area. There's nothing. A chilling wind blew over us. Shivering and exhausted, we went back home. I didn't sleep at all that night, tortured by the still fresh images of that old woman. I was sick, still seeing her teeth and morbidly scarred body. I went on to vomit through the night. I finally managed to sleep a few meager hours. Waking up groggy and tired, with images of the hag still swimming through my mind, I went to the kitchen adjacent to my room, grabbing some cereal and milk, and putting a decent amount in my bowl. I dug into it like a wild animal. After last night's ordeal of consistently expelling the contents of my stomach, I felt like I could eat a horse with room for dessert. I had my fill. With a full belly, I started pondering if I should go back. I really wanted those puppies to have a proper send-off to the afterlife. I met up with my friends again. They were too scared to go back, and there was no way to convince them. I understood their feelings. I didn't want to go back myself, if it wasn't for those pups. But something made me want to go, no matter what. I told them I'm going back there. They were against it. I still went ahead, alone. This time, now knowing what to expect, made it a little better. At least I wouldn't be surprised. I got to the bridge, looking towards the path that led to my destination, fear starting to spread through my body like wildfire. Yesterday's images feeling like they happened minutes ago. I took a sharp, deep breath, steeling myself, knife firmly in my hand, and started making my way to the waterfall. I slowly made my way back, on edge. Every little sound made me jump. Everything in my body was tense and strained to the maximum. I passed the place where the first pup was hanged. Nothing. The segment of the wire that was left after I cut it was gone. The dirt seemed even and flat everywhere, like there was no digging. My makeshift tool was also gone. Even the rock we put on top of the grave was nowhere in sight. I found that odd, but it didn't make me stop. Continuing my careful walk to the waterfall, I made it to the second site. No puppies, no blood. Everything as it should be. I looked up at the waterfall, expecting the worst possible scenario. Nothing. I decided to climb up the side of the path that leads to the top of the waterfall where the old woman stood the day before. I got up, making my way to the top of the waterfall, with no one in sight. A serene atmosphere, birds singing, water gently crashing down, the coolness of the shaded forest with sunlight peeking in here and there. It felt magical. I went to the exact spot where we saw the hag. In the mud, on the side of the creek, a set of small, human footprints. They looked normal, but each footprint had nail marks half as long as the footprint. I'm sure it was her, that hag, witch creature, whatever she was. I decided not to follow yet. It took everything I had to get that far. Calming down, I started to feel pain all over my body from how tense I was moments ago. I went back home, planning on what to do tomorrow. I was scared, shitless, pondering if I should return. I was curious, much too curious. Why was everything gone, like nothing happened? All evidence just evaporated, gone into non-existence. In the end, I made up my mind. I was going to follow the footsteps. I needed closure, and finding out what happened was the only way to go about it. The next morning, I grabbed my backpack and started packing. My trusty knife, sturdy rope, flashlight, and a hoodie in case I ended up staying until dusk and it got colder. I headed out. I didn't tell anyone about where I was going. Dumb move considering the whole situation, but I digress. This time, having purpose, I quickly maneuvered through the streets, past the Devil's Bridge, over all the rocks, and back up to the waterfall. I took a look around, finding the footsteps still there. They looked even fresher than the day before. They went up straight through the forest. I knew the area around me decently well. That led to an old abandoned water basin that used to supply our area with water. I made my way up, reaching the familiar concrete plateau. In full view in front of me is the water basin, surrounded by a tall fence. Because of the concrete, I was unable to see the footprints. I tried to work out the direction from the last point across the plateau, and sure enough, I found them. They were going even deeper into the forest, no doubt in my mind towards a natural spring. Sure enough, the prints led through there, and started going up to an even deeper section of the forest. I started having second thoughts. especially because that part of the forest started including new dangers such as bears, lynx, wolves, wild boars, and so on. But I already made up my mind long ago. I will advance. This old part of the forest housed ancient trees, humongous, hulking trees with canopies so thick and wide almost no sunlight passed through. The darkness weighed heavily in this part. Even though it was almost September, I felt very cold. I got out my hoodie and put it on. I walked for a good few hours uphill, deeper and deeper. I reached the cave, with the footprints leading straight inside. The cave was even darker than outside. Every part of me screamed not to go in, but making it this far, I couldn't turn back. I went inside, flashlight in hand, shining the light as far as I could to see if there's anything waiting for me. I walked cautiously. The quietness is so loud, it's deafening, like my hearing was stripped from me. The cave opened up into a wider area, possibly a dead end. No, there was a vertical hole, so dark my flashlight couldn't reach the bottom. Glad and disappointed, I brought the rope with me. I found a nice protruding solid stone nearby. I tied it up nice and tight, turning my back to the drop, slowly letting myself lower until I was almost horizontal, and slowly stepped down the cave wall. The flashlight dangled from my belt. Solid ground was in sight, a good 30 meters down. The air was damp, cold, with an earthy smell to it. I made it down and shined my flashlight around, steps carved into the rock itself going further down. I was shocked to see the actual stairs carved in such an unexpected place. I started making my way down carefully so as not to slip or make too much sound. The air was getting heavier. My eardrums started to feel plugged up, and the earthy smell was thicker than before. After quite some time, the cave opened up into a dome-like shape. I looked around the space, up and down, everywhere on the walls, symbols and writing and pentagrams. I looked to the wall nearest to me. It was written in a language I didn't understand. I gathered up enough courage to start walking around the opening. Suddenly, I stepped on something and slipped. I fell with a dull thud. My hands felt something cold on them. Water, perhaps. I shone my flashlight to check. Blood. Every strand of hair on my body stood up. I looked to the ground to see what was the source of my fall. Entrails, bloody and dirty, strewn on the ground. But a sudden realization hit me. I just looked around a moment ago, and there was nothing on the ground. I quickly staggered back up to my feet. I looked again, nausea kicking in, my heart racing, the entrails extending towards one direction. I followed them with my flashlight, too scared to move even an inch from the spot I was in. Then, something came into view. It was one of the puppies from the prior days. I got closer and closer until I was right beside it. This time, it looked like someone or something chewed around the stomach. Such a horrid sight, and such a disgusting smell. I heard something from the direction of the entrance, grunting and a quick shuffling noise. I thought I was going to cry. I covered my mouth with my hand and bit myself hard, the pain bringing me back to reality. The entrance to the space had some protruding edges. On my toes, I dashed quickly to it and slammed my back to it, shutting off the light and covering my mouth and nose, trying to breathe as quietly as I could. I strained my ears to hear. The shuffle was getting closer and closer. I couldn't see anything. My heart felt like it was going to rip through my ribs, as sweat was building up all around my body. Closer and closer, something was at the entrance. ragged breathing and grunting. The shuffling stopped right behind the wall like stone. The only thing separating me from whatever that was. I was sure it was the witch-like creature, my mind flooding with images of what I saw that day. A couple more shuffles followed with some grunts. I could hear her sniffing the air. She screamed, this time not that guttural sound, but a banshee-like howl. Tears were falling down my face onto my hand, still tightly cupped on my nose and mouth. Silence. I heard nothing more. Too scared to move, I sat there trying to calm myself, listening keenly for any other sounds. After what seemed like about 2 hours, I heard shuffling. This time going in the direction of the puppy. This time I could hear everything. Being robbed of my sight, all of my senses felt heightened. Hearing, memory, touch, and smell. After a while, I heard chewing sounds. My overexerted mind quickly deduced that it was the puppy. I got a rush of adrenaline. I slowly picked myself up, feeling the stone around me. My memory started recreating a map of the path to freedom. I felt my way around to the entrance, still listening to the chewing sound. I started making my way slowly up the steps. After what felt like an eternity, I could see a small sliver of very dim light. I stopped and listened. Silence. I turned on the flashlight, and my heart sank. The rope was torn down. At this point I was desperate. The almost vertical wall had many little ledges and cracks. I tried to memorize it as much as I could. I tied the flashlight to the neck of my shirt with my keychain and started making my way up. About halfway, my hands were hurting. I was sweaty, but all I wanted was to get out. Nothing more. I just wanted to get home and forget this whole predicament I was in. My hands slipped. I fell. Luckily, I fell on my feet and straight into a barrel roll. I hurt my feet quite a bit, but it felt like nothing was broken or sprained. Then I heard it, deep from within the cave. The shriek I heard last time. She heard me. She was coming. This time there was no shuffling. I was hearing a distant patter of bare feet on the solid rock stairs. The steps were fast, very fast. I nearly passed out from fright. I thought I was going to die. I bit myself again, somehow in a semi-conscious state, this time on my forearm. Pain woke me up again, giving me some feeling in my legs. I scrambled to my feet. I grabbed onto the vertical wall and started climbing fast, hands moving almost instinctively to the right spots. More than halfway up, I looked down, and it was quiet. Nothing at the bottom. I was so focused on getting up, I didn't notice the sounds had ended. My eyes moved slowly to the path on the wall. Bloody stains, handprints, and nail scrapings. She tried to get me, but probably gave up. I looked up, the sliver of light still there, giving me hope to move. I finally made it all the way up. I saw the exit and got out of that cave. I finally made it back. The shade of the forest felt refreshing, like I hadn't felt it in years. I started making my way back, but then I noticed something odd. My hands were only covered in a bit of dirt and no blood. I checked my clothes, and again they were the same. A bit of dirt, but no blood. At this point, I was so relieved that I escaped that I didn't care if my mind played tricks on me. I was alive and out and on my way home. Dusk started setting in as I was approaching the water basin. I made it to the front of my house. The street lights turned on. I was home, safe and alive. I took a bath and went to bed. The next day, I met up with Chad and Louie. I told them what happened. They did not believe me. Even though we've seen that creature together, they still had doubts. I wanted to prove it to them, so I took them to the cave. Except, there was no cave to be found. It just disappeared. In its place, a huge tree, the largest I've seen. They laughed at me, saying I must have dreamt it up in my sleep. Years later, the tree fell over, and there was a cave underneath. No hole was leading down vertically. It had caved in. They don't remember most of this, but I do. I still do.